Hello, everyone. Welcome to our episode of It's Me, Not You. We would like to preface this that this needs to have a trigger warning. If you or someone has experienced suicide and you do not feel comfortable with this topic, we recommend that you do not listen to this episode. This will be focused on suicide. So, hello, Melissa.
Hello.
Hello, Jake.
Hey.
So, suicide. Suicide is a super heavy topic. And I can just tell you, in my professional experience, we've had multiple patients this week alone that have said that they're suicidal. And this energy of not wanting to be here anymore feels escalated. I know Melissa has done a lot of readings lately of people that have passed over by suicide. And I personally have experienced having a brother committing suicide, I think 6 years ago. And I've also had a son who was suicidal and had a plan, had an intent, had means, had motive. And thank God the police got him from the highway and took him to the hospital, and he's doing okay now. So, and my mother and my brother have all tried to commit suicide multiple times. So it is not an easy topic. And I think the reason why we want to bring this up is that there is help for those who have that feel like they don't want to be here anymore. And there's also help for the circle that surrounds you for somebody that is no longer here. So because it's heavy and it weighs on you, and it's this feeling of hopelessness that surrounds you of, oh my God, like this happened, this might happen. And I think that's really tough too. The people that deal with family members that have been suicidal and that maybe have been admitted to hospitals because they've tried to commit suicide. And then you're always walking on eggshells afterwards for many months, many months. Like I can't tell you, I hope my son doesn't listen to this. I can't tell you how many times I went downstairs into my son's room and I'm like, I hope you're still alive. Like it's just such a heavy energy that weighs on you. Thank God he's okay now, but you just don't know. So Melissa, why don't you talk about how you've kind of seen this over the last couple of weeks, and it's also weighed on you energetically.
It has. I mean, it's really hard, being a medium and connecting with somebody that has passed by suicide and the guilt that they feel. Sometimes it's guilt over not feeling the pain anymore, but knowing that they caused so much other pain. You feel it. Like there's no way to not feel that pain from both sides, that emotion from both sides. And I'm not trying to take away from what people are going through by any means by me saying that I feel that. It's just how hard, and so many people, I think there's two sides. There's the ones who oh, well, we're not surprised. You could see that with that person, or the other case where it's like they were always so happy. They always seemed like everything was okay. So I think that goes to how can you have conversations within your nucleus? So whether your nucleus is family or friends or whatever that circle is of, hey, I'm not okay. I think we have this incorrect way of, and I'm very passionate about this, being strong is a load of garbage. Being vulnerable to me is true strength. And I'm not great at being vulnerable either. I hate asking for help. I feel guilty when I ask for help, just for small things. It's hard to ask for help. It's hard to say that, hey, I'm not okay. I also think it's hard for those in high stress jobs who are looked down upon if they say, I'm not okay. Like whether it's law enforcement or, they'll take things from me if it all look like I have a mental health issue, versus that stigma of that's put on it. So I just think that we have to learn, society, individually, how to be strong in being vulnerable, how to be allowed, especially for men. It's okay to be emotional. It's okay to have feelings. It's okay to share those feelings. It's okay not to have it together all of the time. That's why we're here, to help each other with community. So Go ahead.
I think the issue right now is, especially, I think this is a problem right now, is that there's not a lot of places to get help at. Like
Mm,
when you are feeling, in the well, or like you don't want to be here anymore, or even if you're depressed or having a lot of anxiety, a lot of hospitals, when you go there, they're going to discharge you.
yeah.
And it is kind of a scary kind of cycle to be in when you have people that are searching for help and assistance, and they're not really getting it. Like, I can tell you of two hospitals right now that will just punch you right out the door. And so I do think, like Melissa is saying, that it is important to get some sort of a safety plan in place, and to maybe say, okay, Jake, listen, when I need you, like, I'm going to need you. And
Hmm.
maybe it's a check-in, maybe it's something. You need to have some sort of a person or group that may be available for you to reach out to. Fortunately, though, especially in our counties, we do have mobile crisis, and they are an excellent service. And you can honestly, even if you're a family member, you can call them and put them on alert. Hey, I've got
Hmm.
this person and this is what's going on. They reach out to the patient. They do a lot of stuff. And that is an amazing service that we have. And I've utilized them twice this week alone.
Hmm.
So I want
And
to say also, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off
go
again.
ahead.
The other thing is that I think a lot of people that have had a family member that has committed suicide, they blame themselves.
Mhm.
Well, what if? I wish I would have seen this. But Melissa's right. Like with my brother, no indication, none, none.
Well, yeah. And I think that it's kind of like what Melissa was talking about earlier about the importance of having those conversations with your family, with your
Yeah.
inner nucleus of people, because I think it's become such a cultural thing where, the person that's going through that experience of suicidal ideation, there's that feeling of guilt, or feeling like you are going to be a burden for introducing that to everybody else around you. And so that makes them kind of push it down even further, right?
Mm,
And we have to also remember, people who are in the space of where they are actively thinking about suicide or thinking about, planning it, or just in that mindset, and it's been kind of malingering the whole time. It's really it's an illness of the brain that really affects your perception, and also kind of almost tricks you into further going down the rabbit hole, especially when you're in an isolated space. So I think that a lot of times, like as a family member or as a friend that's a survivor of that situation, that lives on after that person passes, will always find ways to harbor guilt or harbor thoughts of, God, I could have done better, or I should have reached out more, things like that. And I think that that's always a touch and go situation, right? Because sometimes the person who's in that dark space doesn't feel like they should reach out, or
mm.
there are parameters that are set on them that make them feel like they should not
Or
burden
maybe they don't
somebody,
feel
or that they shouldn't
worthy.
share it. Yes, absolutely. So it really is extremely difficult to navigate through that situation, but also at the same time, there also has to, like our last episode, be a really big level of forgiveness into play too. Forgiveness into the play because that person was just in a dark space, and that is unfortunately the decision that they chose. But it's not anybody's fault by any means. Nothing that we do or say necessarily tips the scale uh, to make that person make the decision, right? Um,
I want to ask you both
yeah.
this question. When you've read for people's families that they've experienced suicide, it almost feels like it's a taboo, like, reason for somebody to die. Like, and then it's almost like the death isn't as meaningful. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's like a stigma. Like, well, your family
Right.
member committed suicide, so whatever.
You can't talk about it, or you're
Can't
not
talk
allowed to
about it.
grieve, or
Right.
you can't get the same support, which I think is absolutely ridiculous.
Hmm.
Most of the times before I see, so when this is how I see, and everyone's different.
Mhm.
But usually I can see when somebody's passed, like who was there to guide them home. This person was waiting for them, this person. But when I see this big white angel feather and it just really softly floats down,
I'm gonna
yeah,
start crying.
that's how I know, because the angels had to carry them home. Because
Hmm.
that grief, that pain, only the angels know how to hold them.
And to Melissa's point, nobody that commits suicide is stuck. They're not in
Absolutely.
hell. They're not
No.
in purgatory. They're going to heaven.
Absolutely. I don't entertain that idea. And I really make it a big part of my responsibility as a reader or as somebody who is doing a channeling session. Because it's like clockwork. Anytime that this subject comes up in a session or a loved one comes from the other side that has taken their life, the person sitting across from me is always, fuck, what was I just saying?
About they go to heaven.
Ha, okay, yes. The person across from me is always, there's always that fear. And I think that it comes from religious fear, of course, you know, that of like, oh no, they're in purgatory, or are they, tell me, give it to me straight, you know, did they go to the brimstone and charcoal
Right.
place? And it's just so heartbreaking to see that, because it's fear in that person's eyes, fear in that person's heart, because they are just so worried that they, I think that it's almost like a worry that we're not able to help them as a spirit on the other side now, even kind of just furthering along the guilt of not being able to help them in the physical world too, right? So I always thought that that was such I always thought it was such a shame that where we are culturally has really trained us to think that people who commit suicide um have to be punished for it further. You know, obviously people who commit suicide are in very tough places and feel like they have really run out of options, or are obviously have it hard enough in that situation. And then to further just weave a story that punishes them for it, that villainizes them for that. I think it's so unfortunate. And so I think that that's really important that we talk about this more often, that we again extend that hotline to our friends to be like, hey, always feel free to talk to me, always feel free to reach out to me. But you know, at the same time, I, in my personal experience with suicide, a friend of mine who did take their life was not somebody that chose to reach out to anybody, you know. And so you're left with a way to kick yourself. On the subject, I do also think that there's a big conversation around grief and the grieving process in terms of suicide too, because I think with a lot of deaths traditionally, you know, either someone passes from an illness or someone passes from an accident, or something that you can either see coming or something that there's a way that we can relate to it with everybody else and we can find peace in that, right? Or relatability. And then, however, with suicide, it's almost like it's the rug being pulled out from underneath you, and it's almost like, well, I didn't get that last chance to say goodbye, or I didn't get the last chance to have that conversation I wanted. And I think that that can be really fracturing as a spirit to us, the living ones that move forward, and that in itself can really become a wound that just chronically feels like it's always open. And so we can really
I
fester
think
in
that,
that.
yeah. And I think people that have like, they see a friend or maybe a coworker that has experienced somebody, they lost a loved one through suicide, or a friend or whatever. Like, people don't know how to act towards that
Mhm.
person. And then, like you said, the rug is pulled out. It's like, I ended up losing my job over my brother like committing suicide. Like, it was just something that really took me out. And
Absolutely.
another point to you, Jake and Melissa, I don't know if you've seen this too. Like, my sister and I talked about this. It's like allowed grief, like, because it was my stepbrother, like the biological family members got to grieve
Mhm.
more severely than us. And it was this kind of like staircase of, well, you need to, it was just a very weird, and it still is kind of a very weird, like, flowing of energy. Like, everyone should be given space to grieve how they need to grieve and how they can move forward with this moment that's happened.
I don't, yeah, and I see that, and nobody has the right to tell you that their connection with somebody meant more than your connection to somebody, regardless of blood, of how long you've known them, of whatever that is. That's not right.
Yeah, like, oh, well, I was friends with them for 57 years.
Right.
And like, well, just because, yeah, yeah, that's really important. So, I mean, I think it's a conversation that, it's almost like with death and dying. We've talked about this before. People don't want to talk about what their plans are for the, how you want to be buried, how you want to be remembered, how you want to, what do you want the family to do? I do think this is a conversation that, if we do talk about it more, then maybe people who are feeling like they're in the well and feeling like they don't want to be here anymore, maybe they'll
Right.
feel more comfortable in reaching out, because it is such a taboo topic. And we've seen a lot of celebrities have committed suicide, a lot of people near us commit suicide. And, I know Melissa talks about this and with astrology and whatnot, and this heightened sense of energy and chaos. And, a lot of people are feeling like alone and feeling like maybe they just don't want to be here anymore. And I think I would like to, really preface, like, reach out to someone. There's texting you can do, there's phone calls you can make it anonymous, and people will kind of help you to just say, all right, you're not alone. And let me help you, let me hold you during this moment, because it does happen to a lot of
And
us.
don't wait. Don't think that, oh, other people have it worse. Like they're just going to tell me no big deal, or that's not true. Like
Yeah.
what you're going through at the degree that you're going through, that's what matters.
That's
Right.
really important that you
About
say that.
comparing.
Yeah.
It's not a competition, right? You
No,
know, just because somebody
no.
else is more
Trauma
traumatized than
bombing on
me,
you.
right? Or someone is in physically apparent more pain than I, does not put them priority over your right to need healing too, your right to need comfort.
So true.
And I think a lot of this again comes back to a cultural thing too. I think a lot of this is really heavy here in the West, and I think that it's very popular in other Eastern cultures where they do embrace death, where they integrate it into cultural holidays, things like that. Where the conversation around death is a little bit different. Whereas in Western, theology, we kind of really approach it in this very black and white perspective. And if your means of passing does not meet that traditional rubric
It's so
here,
true. It's so
we
true.
we like shame it and almost like outcast that. And then even just think about like how think about the people who responded to you in those situations where you shared, oh, my loved one has taken their life, how they changed the way that they interact with you, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden it's either shutting down or it's
Yep.
avoidance.
Yes.
Changing the subject. Yep.
Yes, like being evicted from that energy exchange
I love
because you
that.
have that
Evicted.
experience. Yes,
It's so
it's
true.
so it's so
It's from
unfortunate. It's
afar.
so
It's
Right.
people
yes,
treat you from afar. It's
yes.
I will send you love and support from afar. And I remember even calling my boss in the day because I was on call, and even she didn't reach out or do anything. And like
Hmm.
it was just she's like, I couldn't understand you. Like, and it's just, and it's interesting how it comes up. But I'm grateful to be able to talk about the fact that there is help. I wish that my brother felt comfortable enough. I wish that Jake's friend felt comfortable enough to go and get help. I just wish that, and that's okay, because now we can say there are these resources that now we know about. There's
Right.
mobile crisis, there's suicide prevention hotlines, there's texting,
Hmm.
and I think I want to talk up to Melissa about, Melissa, you've read a lot of people that have gone through this and have experienced this, and that energy has impacted you. So as a reader, what type of protections or what type of energy cleansings do you recommend to, because you're crying, like this is held on to you. What can you, for a reader that's going through this, one, there's the ethics of how do you deliver this, and then the
Right.
two of how do you move past that energy
So,
as
you
Jake
know,
eats his Scooby snacks.
right. In some ways, it's having so many people at once. There's like, I don't know enough about survivor groups, but there have to be groups for those who have survived it to be able to talk. I
That's a
like to
good point
be
too.
comfortable enough to give the space where they can chat about it, because I'll have people that start, well, it was an overdose, it wasn't suicide. And it's like, okay, there's no stigma to me if somebody passed, that you love them and they passed and it hurts.
Hmm.
Um, it's hard to not think about that. I mean, that pain, like Jake said, is just, it's raw because you weren't expecting it. But along with that, like if somebody dies from sickness, it hurts, but you don't feel guilty. You don't feel
Hmm.
shame. There's so
Oh,
much
good
self-blame
point.
that happens when somebody commits suicide. I should
Hmm.
have done more. I should have been more. So again, listen to our episode on forgiveness as well. for those
and about
kinds
the
of,
death and dying.
yeah, and death and dying. So for me, you know, I have gone to get help for myself. I've gone to talk to somebody, like, how can I be more supportive of people that have experienced, you know, suicide? I've gone to a counselor to get like, hey, can you help me navigate this for other people?
Mhm.
And doing this, you know, this was a big thing that, you know, when I talked to Rachel, like, do you feel comfortable? I know you've experienced this firsthand. Um, and I think it needs to be talked about.
Mhm.
It's not, when you hide pain inside, it manifests in horrible ways.
Mhm.
Yes,
You,
it does.
you've been through so much as a survivor. You need to talk about it and not hide it and not feel ashamed and really have that release of grief
Mhm.
that needs to occur. So, you know, as a medium, I don't have a lot of advice, you know, other than just sitting with that person and whatever it is that you need to do to get those emotions outside of you, talking to somebody, playing, you know, going for a walk, whatever that is, because it's a vibrational thing. And I'm not taking away from anybody's journey. Again, it's just, I think I read 8 of them, you know, in a week, and it was just like, gosh, there's so much pain. How do you help the
Mhm.
pain? So, and I think the way of helping the pain is just, I continued, you know, emergency readings or whatever it was. Um, so I think the most impactful one I read, this was a couple years ago, but a family came to me. It was the dad who was super close, mom and a daughter. And I did see that it was suicide. And then I remember looking at the girl and saying, you are thinking about this right now. And she was sobbing and saying, yes, I miss my sister. I just want to go. And the parents were in shock. And then they were able to get her help, you know? So I've also had people during COVID that said, hey, whatever messages you gave me, I did decide not to kill myself. The weight of that was a lot, you know, and if I know that somebody is that way, I call for help for them. I get them with the counseling numbers, you know, to find a way. And I guess to kind of sum it up, the biggest thing when you're helping somebody else, don't judge.
Hmm.
Don't judge.
Absolutely. And I think there's always like a question of like, well, I don't know how to approach that situation, or I don't know how to be of service in this situation. And I think that that question alone, that conflict alone, really stops a lot of people from stepping into a situation just because they don't know the correct way, and they certainly don't want to hurt an already fragile situation. And I would just encourage everybody to, the biggest thing you can do is, number one, be present and show up for that person. And, you know, you ask, you know, what do you need right now? What can I do for you? And if that person has no idea what you can do, then you still be present. You watch them, you take care of them, you care for them, almost as if it's a child that's sick. You know, you tend to them, you take care of them, and you just pour that love into them. And then, of course, you take the parameters and you take the precautions. You call who you need to call. You reach out to other family members, because sometimes it's sometimes you have to take charge in a situation like that and not let that person who's in that experience, you know, decide how it's navigated, decide how it plays out, and how everybody else kind of steps in. Not to get off track, but I do also think that there's a big part of the healing process as far as suicide goes, as the survivors of those situations, where a lot of people struggle with their memories of that person being the passing, right? You know, what they looked like, how they passed, that traumatic experience there too. And I think that that's a big part of the grieving process, is trying to heal that part of the memory, almost not necessarily replace the memory, but show ourselves, remind ourselves that there is a much more beautiful memory to be had, right? And I
Mhm.
think it's a lot more difficult in suicidal situations, whereas, you know, if it's a grandmother that passed from cancer, right, a lot of people will remember them still sick, but then over time they're able to go back to, oh, but grandma was, you know, so beautiful when she was in her 40s, she loved to do this and this was our great memories. And sometimes with suicide, there's again that guilt and that grieving that still needs to be happening there, that really kind of holds on to that image, really kind of holds on to that version. um, and I even find myself ebbing and flowing through that too, with a friend of mine, um, who ended up doing that as well. it's so odd. It's so odd about the grieving process, right? How it never stops, and things that you thought you were done with just pops up again randomly, and then you have to remind yourself, you're like, oh no, I worked through this. I thought we came into agreement here, but then for some reason, some way, maybe it's approaching that time of year, or it's a holiday, or it's something that just kind of sparks that memory where you're like, God, I really miss that person, and then your brain goes back to that. It's God, it's really a tough and it's really a cruel cycle, right? Um, and so there has to just be a lot of compassion poured into it, to yourself, your community, your friends, your family that also survived as well. Um, we have to talk about it more post passing as well. And I don't think we do so as much, you know. Um,
And I
yeah,
think we
there's
should celebrate their life, not their death.
yes,
Yeah,
Celebrate the
absolutely.
life of the person.
I will say for my brother, we don't celebrate the day that he passed. We
Hmm.
celebrate his birthday. So, and we don't. I honestly, I don't even know what day he passed. I can look, but I have no idea. I always remember his birthday. I always remember him. And to Jake's point, I like talking about my brother. There's a lot of similarities with my kids, with my brother, that I feel like my brother is with them. You know,
Hmm.
my both my boys play guitar. Both my boys play video games.
Hmm.
Like, and I know my brother is with him. You know what I mean? And that to me
Hmm.
gives me peace. And I also feel like I'm honoring him and I'm honoring his memory by talking about him. And I talk about him in a positive light. You know, I'm not going to, whatever happened, happened. And I'm grateful that I had the years with him that I did, you
Hmm.
know, and that we're able to move forward.
Exactly. And we don't heal by, pushing that down, tampering it down, and forgetting the person, forgetting that whole experience. We heal by continuing to tell their story,
Yeah.
continuing to tell their story and love them from the distance that we're at right now,
Yeah,
you know?
I have my brother's card, you know, from his memorial. It's over here on my wall. Just
Hmm.
yesterday, I touched it and I'm like, "Hey, bro." Like, you know,
Hmm.
because it was kind of falling down. I was like, "Hey,
Yeah.
bro." Like, "How's it going?" You know? And it's just
Hmm.
that quick. Like, "Hi, I love you. I know you're with me." And I think that's the other thing. They're with us. They're
Hmm.
with us. And Melissa and Jake both said they're in heaven. Like Melissa has the angels that carry them away. Like that's such a beautiful thing. You know, anything else you
Yeah.
guys want to add before we wrap this up? And
Um,
I think we're just going to say, like, you're not alone in this if this is something that you're feeling. And also, you're not alone in it if you're a survivor of it. There are
Absolutely.
support groups, there are people you can talk to, you know, and grieving doesn't end.
Hmm.
Grieving doesn't end. And that they're
No,
just make sure that you reach out for help if you need it.
And even though
absolutely.
grieving doesn't end, healing continues too. Like there is always
Yeah.
ways to heal, and it just gets a little easier
Yeah.
with time. That all never goes away, but continue to celebrate the good. And lastly, if you're somebody that's really going through something, don't wait until you get to this point.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I'll tell the people at work is like snowflakes become snowballs. Deal
Mhm.
with it while it's still a snowflake, you know, kind of what this little thing and what path can you become on.
Yeah.
And nobody is perfect.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people have a perfectionist, you know, myself included, mindset, but nobody is perfect with things.
Mhm.
Therefore, there's no judgment. And survivors are allowed to go for help too.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Hospice has free counseling, free grief
Mhm.
counseling, and they also have it for kids. It's called Wave Riders. So,
Mhm.
on that note, everybody have a good day and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.